And so I've been caught unprepared. It's all good. We'll be there in 5 seconds. Anybody home? All right. Well, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to continue through to the end of Romans 1 in this session. And then in the last session, I'm going to speak about Romans 1 and verse 16 and just talk about what is the gospel in light of everything that we've learned. And there's the old saying that diamonds shine brightest against black backgrounds. And so we'll set the diamond at the end of the day. And the darker the background, the better it looks, let me tell you. I want to come back to where we left off, which was I was describing one of these fundamental human impulses, which is a product of being a fallen human being. And it is that we suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And I gave some personal evidences of that, things that come out in people's personal lives and the way that they behave. And I didn't mean to disparage anybody who has a calling on their life to be a lawyer. There's tremendous opportunity in those sorts of environments to be what Jesus says, which is salt and light. What's the salt? Well, it's a difference that is there to impact the environment. It's the salt's useless, right, when it gets compromised by the moisture seeping in. When the environment that it's in gets into it and changes it. It's a great trap for us to fall into, that sometimes we think that by compromising or changing or adapting, we can have a bigger influence. No, the lesson of the salt is that your difference in that environment is what makes the difference, your lack of compromise. And then there's a great opportunity to be light, which is to testify of, to shine of, to be seen as, showing a different way to live. So, if the Lord had left me in law, that's what I'd be seeking to do, but that's just not the way that it worked out. But there is those tendencies that people have, and we talked all about the evidence that we see and the creation and how people deal with that and the way people live their lives in what I believe to be and what Scripture teaches to be a suppression of the truth kind of mindset. But I want to show something else which is perhaps more powerful, which is that this is not just limited to our private spheres. This is something which spills over into public life. This is an issue in our culture. You think about it for a second. What opinions attract greatest hostility? They tend to be, well, you say, I look at, for example, the cases that we run, where people have gotten in trouble in their workplaces, where people have gotten in trouble with the law, where people have lost their accreditations, where people have been kicked out of universities. It's usually because they've said something. And it usually, hones in on a few different areas. Something like, let's say, an LGBT issue. That's a real popular one. Sometimes it's a life issue, and we talked about life issue, abortion, and so on at the start. But here's the really interesting thing. It's not as general as that. It is nearly always someone who told the truth about one of those issues. And that's what gets them into trouble. The educator who stands in front of the students and says that gender is a galaxy, you can explore it but you can never discover it, and you might be a two-spirit non-binary genderqueer and you can call yourself nurse, self and nim and nay. Do they ever get hauled up to a tribunal for gender conversion? No, never. Who is it that falls in that category? It's the parent, it's the person who says the opposite. We actually deal with those cases all the time. There is a public square effort whereby the truth is suppressed. There is a truth-suppressing element in culture. Here in Sydney a while ago, Emily's Voice, the pro-life organisation, put up a billboard and it said, "A heart beats at 4 weeks." That is a statement of science. And the Transport Minister had it taken down. Why? It's the truth. And you've got to suppress the truth because the truth testifies of something greater. We've got to protect people's feelings against the truth. There it is, suppression of the truth. This is going on all around us. Actually, it was the big issue with the Israel Folau case. There was a lot of argument at the start, it's all about winsomeness and nuances and all that, but it came out pretty soon that the really big issue, the example I give is that there was a commentator who was writing about this, and he's a pretty conservative guy, and he was saying, look, I support Israel Folau's right to say what he said, but of course I think it's outrageous. Because he said, if that's the criteria for hell, then I'll see you down there. To which I'm going, well, that's the point, right? But what's the problem? What's the anger? He was quite annoyed about what had been said. What's the anger? The idea that I would be judged and found wanting. The idea that there's something wrong with me. And that's the truth. There is. I remember sitting around a table where we were talking to some leading activists I think it was in the wake of the same-sex marriage campaign, and there was an activist sitting across the table from me from an LGBT group, and I was sitting on the other side, and there was a church, there's a bishop next to me, and the bishop says, we're trying to have sort of small talk, and it was quite awkward, and he said, the thing is that, people from the LGBT community are very welcome in our church. And this activist on the other side of the table snorted and just said, don't bother. And he sort of was taken aback, and he said, why? And then they said, well, nobody wants to walk into a building and find out that there's something catastrophically wrong with them. At which point I interjected and I said, oh, but there is. And then, of course, the room went deathly silent. And the guy next to me was like kicking, I was expecting a kick under the table. And I left it just for a second. And then I said, there is something catastrophically wrong with all of us. That is why I am a Christian. Because it's true. I believe it. This is not a witch hunt against any individual person or community. This is a human reality. And the only answer is the cross of Christ. That's Christianity. Everyone walking into a church should be hearing there's something catastrophically wrong with them. And of course, this is the thing. That truth, a society we live in today, they hate messages of judgment. They hate messages of negativity. They hate messages that expose moral wrongs. In them, all right, in others. But you get the same kind of thing. I was at, early on when we started the Human Rights Law Alliance, I found myself sitting in the High Court of Australia. And there we were in the Constitutional Chamber, the Court number 1, and it was a constitutional law case, and our client was there, and it was really remarkable. There were barristers everywhere in that room. There were legal teams sent by the Commonwealth, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, the Australian Capital Territory, Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia. And then there was the counsel for the actual police force who were laying the charges in the first instance. And then there were interveners as well. You had a couple of other groups there just on the side. All the king's horses and all the king's men had turned up to fight this case. Do you know who it was against? It was against a lady called Kathy. She's a mother of 13. She's probably 5'2". And she was charged with the heinous crime of communicating about abortion in a way that can be seen or heard within 150 metres of an abortion clinic. That's a fact that happened. And you know what? She lost. What she did was somebody walked past her, a woman, and she handed her a piece of paper which was declined. The piece of paper was folded, and on the inside there was usually, this is the way she used to operate, some kind of message or statement that helps available, I'm here to talk. That's what she tried to do. And you know, Kathy had stood on those sidewalks in Melbourne for years. And her friends who had been doing this ministry that no one knew about, as far as I can never find anyone who really knew about them, just quietly making these offers of help and support and standing there and praying, they had seen more than 300 babies born alive as a result of their interventions. And she is friends with so many mothers. She used to go and give them in-home care and support. She used to teach them how to raise their kids. They used to give them financial help, used to be friends with them, used to give them a safe haven from domestic violence, whatever it took. Tremendous ministry. There is a woman who is doing good, who is doing right. She used to say, I'm an apostle of God's mercy. I'm here to show mercy to these women. I read the letters from all the women that she had helped, heaps of them, pictures of the babies. I tell you, I'm not a crying type. You might have picked that up, but my goodness, this stuff really is moving. It's really moving. And yet not only did they pass laws which they full well knew would only really criminalise her and her friends, there's really no other conduct going on that would be captured by the laws. And even though she went and spoke to the parliamentarians and we showed them all the letters, and it passed anyway, and then she goes and gives this piece of paper, she gets arrested. By the way, you might have heard there's a crime wave on down in Victoria, or there was before COVID came along. But the crime wave you didn't know about was 5'2" Kathy Clubb. I hope she's probably like 5'10". But anyway, Kathy Clubb, mother of 13, coming along and giving a pamphlet to someone. 8 police officers arrested her that day. And there she was in the High Court. And I sat there and I thought, what is this? Because, you can go through all the legal hoopla you like and you can describe it all in, sanitised and constitutional terms and all this kind of thing. The simple reality at the end of the day is that she was punished for doing good. She was punished for testifying of the truth, which is the opposite, by the way, of governing authority's obligation in Scripture, which is to reward that which is good and punish that which is evil. It's stated time and again. It's their primary job. And here she was, she did that. And I sit there and I see case after case like that. I see the foster parents who are excluded from the fostering system because of their faith. I see the university student who prays for a friend of his with her permission. She thinks better of it, reports him. He gets suspended and various other things happen to him. I see, the medical doctor I talked about at the start of this session. I see this stuff going on all over the place. I see the general manager of a digital services company who's challenged by a staff member about his beliefs in a staff meeting. He answers generously and kindly. He gets complained about to the board and he gets dismissed. I mean, there's not even extenuating circumstances in these cases. They just happen like that. And what's happening here is that you do encounter in society, you encounter in culture, an impulse that is geared against the truth. Jesus says in Matthew 5, he said, blessed are the persecuted for righteousness' sake, right? And you find these types of people who, whenever something goes wrong, whenever something is said, like take the Easy Folau issue, they say, no, the real reason is that you weren't winsome. You weren't nuanced. There's a way you could say it which is so perfect that nobody will get angry. Why did Jesus say for righteousness' sake? He could have just said, blessed are those who are persecuted because they're morons who can't speak properly. No, it's not the tone that matters. It's the truth. It's the righteousness. It's the substance that matters. There's no way to say some things. Some things are just true truths. And they need to be spoken. I was going somewhere in my head and it's lost, but that must mean I'm not meant to say it. So let's move on. You see it in culture and you see it in ideologies as well. One of the really presenting ideas in our culture at the moment is this issue of cultural Marxism. People dispute whether cultural Marxism is a thing. They sometimes like to use other labels. Whatever label you like. I like cultural Marxism because it really explains it very nicely. For example, this idea that society is vitiated with oppression. That's what this is all about, this whole existence on this earth. Society is all about oppressors and oppressees. And people like me are the grand oppressors. And we're out there, and because of our existence and because of who we are, people are oppressed. And these tribes are at war with each other for power. And that's the situation we find ourselves in. And really what these people are saying is there is no way out. You have warring groups, groups that are divided by race, groups that are divided by gender, groups that are divided by sexuality, groups that are divided into all the categories that we've now become familiar with, and they are at war for power. Now, it's that kind of thinking that is fueling so much of the division that's going on at the moment. It's that kind of thinking that is fueling so much of the lawfare that's going on at the moment with illegal cases based on offending different identity attributes. It's that kind of thinking that you get at university every single day. It's that kind of thinking that says the only explanatory matrix for anything in this world is oppression. Oh, someone committed a crime. They were oppressed. Oh, somebody did this or that, or this is wrong in this community, or that's gone wrong. It's oppression. As if there's, a one-hit wonder explanation for everything. Do you know what I realized about cultural Marxism, this set of ideas? It's in what they call oppressive. If you make a list of the things that they call oppressive, go, for example, to the Black Lives Matter website and read their statement of what we believe and make a list. Make a list. Do you know what they are? They are heteronormativity. The idea that people are male and female, boys and girls, and boys like girls and girls like boys, and they get married and have children. Oh, oppression. That's one. And indeed, if you go to someone like Ros Ward, who is the founder of the Safe Schools Coalition, who calls herself a Marxist and was scheduled to speak at this year's annual Marxism Conference 2020 before it got cancelled because of coronavirus, you go to her, and what does she say? She says, what we're doing is we're liberating children from the shackles of heteronormativity so that their sexuality and their gender can flourish in new and amazing ways that we can only try and imagine today. Okay, so you get all the gender bending in the schools, you get all of the sexuality teaching in the schools, you get all of this stuff into their heads because we're liberating them from heteronormativity. Or indeed, you could pick another one, let's say marriage. Patriarchal. All about ownership. Don't be married, be a slave to an employer, not a family. That's freedom. Okay. The UN describes, there's those things that believe, but then you've got the issue of children as well that come from that environment. And the UN actually uses this phrase, and many people now use this phrase, it's catching on, the motherhood penalty. So if you're a mum, you suffer some kind of penalty. More than you actually experience the whole teaching of the Bible is that children are among the greatest blessings any person, man or woman, can have. Oh no, but it's a motherhood penalty and it holds people back and blah, blah. And basically, this is one of the reasons why I don't like a lot of right-wing politics. This is one of my big critiques of the right wing, which is it's all about getting people into the workforce, productivity, economics, more. And what's one of the things they specifically set out to do is to get every man and every woman into the workforce. What about the children? Who looks after them? It's not right, It's money hungry, economic growth at all costs. But see, cultural Marxism or critical theory, as you might say, is probably a better phrase to use. It comes along and it says children, they're oppressive. Marriage, it's an oppressive institution. Family, heteronormativity is oppressive. Or indeed, they say that, if you work, if you've got a job, you're oppressed. You're a worker, you need to rise up against the oppression of the bourgeoisie. This is where it gets very classically Marxist, because you are somebody who is exploited for your labour by the rich capitalists who sit back and smoke cigars behind a table like the guy on the front of the Monopoly box and just laugh all day about all the people they're killing and destroying. Again, work, oppression. Do you know what else they say is oppression? And you go and read what the Movement for Black Lives says, which is the umbrella movement for, say, Black Lives Matter, another very culturally Marxist movement. They actually say, one of the things that's raised is, if somebody's arrested by the police or if somebody finds themselves in the justice system, it's because they've done the wrong thing. And one of the great teachings of Scripture is that we're all personally responsible for what we do. And we all face different challenges at different points in our lives, and we have different predispositions and whatnot to different kind of failures and all the rest of it. That's true. But we take responsibility for what we do wrong. But they actually say, actually justice itself is it's a patriarchal, racist idea. And really, when people can't obey the law, they're oppressed. Not they've done wrong, there's no moral framework in that way, but they're oppressed. They actually say this. That's why they want to abolish the police, for example, and the Movement for Black Lives is very clear about that. They want to abolish the police, they want to abolish justice, they want to give amnesty for people who have broken the law, they want to do all sorts of things like this. But, compile the list and see if we can find the connection. Justice, the judging of what is wrong. Frankly, I kind of want that to happen. I long for the day that happens. Work, marriage, children, abortion. That's one of the reasons it's so desirable, is because it liberates you from this thing. Heteronormativity. Do there is a common theme? The common theme is that these are all God's good things. Every one of them. Your gender's not oppression. It describes how you were made, the life you're called to. Marriage is not oppression. Do you know the first thing that wasn't good in the Bible was loneliness? The first thing. People are meant to be married. 99% of people, 99.9% of people are meant to be married. Children are not oppression. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And the Bible's full of these statements. And so I could go on. Justice, right? It fell, when man did wrong, and it had to. Otherwise, God would not be just. Work, do you know what? Even in paradise, God ordained work as a very good thing. And it was what we were supposed to do with our lives. And the New Testament picks that up. If you don't work, you shouldn't eat, it says. It's important. All of these things are effectively creation ordinances. They're things that God ordained for our good. Here is an ideological cancer that is everywhere in our world right now. And its whole end game, and so few people see this, its whole end game is the destruction of that which is good according to God's truth. Suppression of the truth in unrighteousness. That's why we should have nothing to do with some of these movements. Some people say to me, surely you can take the good bits and leave the bad. No, nothing. Make up your own movement that's based in the gospel and based in truth. Don't touch it. It's actually in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul actually says in this context of partnerships, it says, what partnership has light and darkness, righteousness and lawlessness? Now, what fellowship has Christ and Belial? None. None. Root and branch, it's rotten. It's the same too with effectively postmodernism, which is, again, it's influenced by lots of things. But one of the ideas of postmodernism, which really, really had its way in society a few decades ago and is now lingering, I heard it described once by a philosopher who said, postmodernism killed the author. Killed the author. In other words, postmodernism said that there is no body, there is nothing that created all truth that is true for all people. And that's where we've landed. That's why people have that psychology I mentioned in the first session, where they say, yeah, that might be true, but I don't care. I just don't care. I want to do it my way. I'm more important. These ideologies evidence the very impulse of which we're talking. And so I repeat, the Apostle Paul is right. When he looks at the society, he says, what's wrong? He says, well, ungodliness and unrighteousness. And how does it continue? People suppress the truth in unrighteousness. That's what's going on all around us. And it's true, when you get involved in politics and stuff, you do find that some of these movements have when you get to the right, when you start really getting to the core of the issue, you sense it. There's something very, very dark going on. The abortion issue is one. If you get really close to that and start getting involved, there's a lot of blowback. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of dirty, nasty, hidden stuff around that. And you find it. It's evil. It's evil. And we don't use that word very often, but it really, really is evil. And evil's at work in the world. Do you know, in the West, I'm quite convinced that for a long time now, we haven't had manifestations of demons, and we haven't had people possessed and prowling around in their possession and all the rest of it. We haven't had a lot of those manifestations you might get in African countries, or that you might have gotten in Jesus' day, or that you might get in different cultures. Because there's a different way that we can be deluded and we can be deceived. And if we saw that, we might have once, actually these days, I think it'll change, by the way, I really do, with the way things are going. But these days, it's in ideas. It has been in ideas for a long time. That you get authors of these ideas who I think just have wicked intent very often. And the devil's got a hold of them, and it catches on. Got to be very, very wise, very discerning in this day and age. Now, the question we ask, though, this should all be pretty obvious that this would be a feature of life in this world. Because you ask the question, what kind of world do we live in? And the answer is, well, we live in a fallen world. So, of course, Of course we expect to see this kind of stuff. If the world is fallen, then it will have a certain degree to which it seeks to expel that which is righteous and that which is of God. The Apostle Paul is not saying anything particularly profound in that respect. So I say that because expectations management will help you cope very much. Now, what kind of world do we live in? Well, it's a fallen world. So it means if you tell the truth, good will happen, and there will be some blowback as well. Obviously, that's the kind of world that we have. Now, one of the ways in which this impulse has played out has been, it's been in the area, there's been a real historical development in the West which interests me. And that is that over the last few hundred years, significant, serious changes have taken place which map us closer to a Romans 1 world. It used to be in the West, and I'm not one of these people who says the West was all perfect. It definitely was not. It never has, and it definitely is not. It never has been. That would be silly. But it is a historical fact that a few hundred years ago, the basic mindset of people was that revelation, God's revelation, was authoritative. People were religious, people were people of faith on the whole. The church had a really important role in society. God's ways, God's truth, God's morality was really central. And there was a real place given to that sort of thing. But of course, as time went on, you had the dawn of sort of the scientific age and this kind of thing, and it started to look like science had more explanatory power and more predictive power than religion. And so people started to be compelled towards science. And to the extent that they thought science left religion for dead or even contradicted religion, they embraced it. And you had in that situation a world emerging where all the philosophy of the day was about reason. It wasn't about divine revelation, it wasn't about natural law, divine law, these kinds of things, but it was reason. How can you construct morality through human intellect? Now, of course, it doesn't take very long in that kind of environment to realize that reason, when disconnected from something solid, something objective like God and his truth, etc., it very quickly simply becomes a question of what you feel like, how you like to think, what you reckon might be true. And one man's truth is another man's lies, and they both seem to have reasonable articulations of their positions, and it becomes very quickly a very postmodernistic environment. And we've reached a new phase in this, and Christians obediently followed, by the way. For a long time, Christians engaged in the public squares not on the basis of gospel or faith, but on the basis of logic and argument and reason. That's been going on for decades in the West. That was a big mistake, because we could still be effective. We could still make good change. And there's a whole generation that was really, really committed to that. It was a bad idea. Because, of course, the necessary fruit was that this would ultimately descend to a position where the only thing that was really authoritative was the individual's subjective experience of the world, which is a fancy way of saying how we feel about stuff. The end was always going to be that self would become authoritative. And in Romans chapter 1, verse 25, that's precisely where it lands. And like I said, the changes have brought us much closer to a Romans 1's world. And Romans 1:25 says they exchanged the truth about God, which is suppressed, as we've seen, for the lie. And they worshipped and served creature rather than creator, who is blessed forever. And it turns out that this truth suppression is a protection racket. We are protecting ourselves from the truth about God because that threatens in my conscience my ultimate desire, which is the original sin of the human race, read it in Genesis, to be like gods. To be like gods. And they ate that fruit which was desirable to make one wise. Man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. To be like us, what does it all mean? All of a sudden, you have people making up their own morality, their own definition of what is good and what is evil, and living it out. That is the fundamental sin of the human race. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, put darkness for light and light for darkness. It's throughout the Bible. Because my constant desire is to put myself on the throne of my life, worship myself, worship my feelings, serve my own wants, my own desires, my own lusts, and my own wisdom in my own eyes. And so far, what we've seen is that the fundamental struggle of the human race is with our struggle as creatures. As creatures, not creators, not gods, creatures. We hate the fact that we are of the dust. We are finite. We are ignorant. We are broken. We are stupid. We hate that. Obviously, compared to the great wisdom that is outside of ourselves. That we can find, we can seek after, desire, but it's not within. And we rebel against that call that's on our life to submit to an almighty creator. There's a bit of Frank Sinatra in every single one of us. For what is man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not. To say all the things he truly feels and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows. I did it my way. And now the end is near. And so I face the final curtain. My friends, I'll say it clear. I'll state my case of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full. I travelled each and every highway. But much more than this, I did it my way. That is the national anthem of hell. There's a little bit of that in every single one of us. We want to do it our way. You know, I did a video recently where I was talking about these deconversion stories, which is apostasy, by the way, but in the modern world we always like to come up with something a bit softer. Deconversion. There's a whole lot of people out there that recently, from church circles, have very, very tragically and sadly announced publicly their deconversion from the faith. And I read very carefully and closely all those stories, and it struck me they all read the same. It was remarkable. They all read the same. It was like the same person wrote them all. And do you know what the real problem was that came through time and time again? It was basically, I don't know stuff. God hasn't told me stuff. I've started to doubt whether God is good and he's holding things back from me. And I've started to believe that actually there are no answers. In other words, it's a rebellion against the fact that we are not as gods. There are things we don't know. If we knew, we'd be God. Because that's the very definition of God. He knows all things. There are things we can't even grasp because we're mere little creatures. There are things that are outside of our purview. We've never seen the world hung in space from a spiritual perspective in the habitation of eternity rather than time. Why would we understand? Of course we wouldn't. We've been told everything we need to know. Everything we need to know. But then people say, but I want to know more. And God is holding back. Has God really said, is there some secret thing which he hasn't revealed? Is there secret knowledge? And this is the doubt that creeps in. And that starts to gnaw away at people. And then they decide, you know what? And this all came out in their stories. They all started to talk about their self-exploration, their self-discovery, finding out who they really are. And then the siren song of worship and service of self took over. And they said, I'll do it my way. I've got a better idea. That's really what was going on. It is a rebellion against the fundamental station that we have as creatures. Do you know, there's a tremendous... Do I have time? What's the time? 12:15. I want to read you something. Maybe I will. Yeah, I will. I'm going to read you something. I'm going to read one of the most profound things. It's written by a very non-Christian man, to say the least. But this guy, Friedrich Nietzsche, was a philosopher. He lived at a time when he saw this, this grasping hold of all that was rational and the rejection of all that was divine. And he knew where this was going. He understood human nature. He understood that the destiny of this would be self-worship, self-aggrandizement, self-exaltation. And he says something really powerful, the parable of the madman. I'm going to read it just because it's fascinating and you can go look it up in your own time. He writes this, it's a parable, it's a story, which is a commentary on society. He says, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright and morning hours, ran into the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God.' As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. 'Has he got lost?' asked one. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' asked another. 'Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, emigrated?' Thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. 'Whither is God?' he cried. 'I will tell you. We have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backward, sideward, forward in all directions? Is there any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing yet as of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto." Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in amazement. At last he threw his lantern on the ground and it broke into pieces and went out. "I've come too early," he said to them. "My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the most distant of stars, and yet they have done it themselves." It's like a prophecy of a demon, isn't it? God is dead. We've killed him. He understands something. Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? He said elsewhere, he said in his writings, "If there is a God, how can I bear not to be that God?" Where do you go when you've unchained the earth from its sun? Where's the new anchor point? When you've wiped away the horizon, where's the new place that we can see to? Who defines the boundaries? Who gives the answers? Who makes the truth? We do. Very simple. We become gods to appear worthy of it, as in to step in to that same place. They worshipped and served creature rather than creator. We have made ourselves creators. And you know, the reason why there's this, it seems unusual when you first read it. You go, why does he mention the sexuality issue here? There's a reason for that. Because what he's saying is we've decided that we are the creators now. So he's saying even that which is not biologically straightforward, which the evidence of creation would tell us isn't really the right thing to do with ourselves, it doesn't work that well, doesn't matter. We decide. Our passions and our desires create what is real. I'm 6'7" with hairy hands, but I'm a woman and I'm beautiful, and the law will tell you that you have to admit it. Is that not where we've arrived? We've decommissioned blasphemy laws. Now the modern blasphemy is insulting my identity. My own sense of my identity is the better way to put it. What a turnaround. This is where we've arrived. But do you think, one of the things Nietzsche says there, he says, this great event's still on its way. He's basically saying to his society, you don't know what you've done. You don't know what you've done. In, prematurely jumping in on the Darwinism thing, etc. You don't know what you've done. There's so much more the fruit that this will bear. And I think we've arrived there. I don't think that the age of self, people as gods, is more distant yet than the most distant of suns. I think we're here. Do you know, we live in the age of, we live in the midst of a self-worship epidemic. We live in the age of, just listen to the phraseology: self-love, self-esteem, self-confidence, self-care, being my best self, self-realization, selfies. Does not the language of a culture give something away? The solution for everything is one of these menu options. It's you, it's you, it's you all the time. Believe in yourself. Dream big dreams. Tell yourself you're worth it. Oh, I feel very inadequate today. You're beautiful. Oh, and we go on our day feeling great. Everything, people rave on about their anxieties and their mental health and all this kind of stuff. And what's the answer? Oh, well, myself is all messed up, so I better choose one of the answers from this menu of self. There can't be the problem and the solution. It cannot be both. We are told that, we're enough, believe in ourselves. I saw some marketing slogans the other day. Master the artistry of you was one. Or I gave a talk actually to church once, and I touched on this in relation to another issue. And the guy got up and he's like, he's like, my phone. It says, unleash your inner rock star on this little push notification that came up. It's like, it's everywhere. This idea that, you are worth it, you have something to offer, you're good, you do amazing things. I listened to a motivational talk the other day. I was doing this coaching session, and we had to watch this motivational talk, and there's this guy, and he's sort of like leaning up to the microphone. He's like, everybody's got a melody, a melody in their heart. It was the world is craving your melody. I thought, well, you know what? The world could have done without Hitler's melody. I don't think the world is craving our melodies, frankly. I don't think the world needs our melody so much as it needs us to do the right thing. And doing the right thing ain't about this. It's about this. We have walked, you see this, one of the things that worries me is that us as Christians, we're falling in this line a little bit. One of the other dead giveaways of culture is this word identity that comes up all the time. I actually did a word search of identity and looked at its usage in English over the last 100 years. Let me tell you, there's a big spike. In recent years, it's just gone bam through the roof. We are banging on about identity all the time. That word, which signifies that there is something of the self that needs to be articulated, that needs to be understood, that needs to be discovered. And there you find the most important of things. And as Christians, we've started to use the word. It's not in the Bible. The Bible answers this question a bit differently, and I'll get to that in just a second. The rise of this language in our culture is starting to shape us, and it's starting to shape the way we talk about our faith. People always talk about, one guy got up and he said at a conference I was at, and he actually mentioned the Israel Folau thing. He's like, he could have been more loving in what he said. I thought, I wonder what he means by loving. Do you know what he meant? Because I went and talked to him afterwards. He meant, really, anyway, he might not say this, but what I believe he meant that to be more loving in our engagement means that we don't deplete the storehouse of positive feels that the person we're talking to might be clinging on to. Meanwhile, Jesus shows up to the Pharisees and says, you're children of the devil. Meanwhile, he shows up to Nicodemus, whose whole life has been built on righteousness and good. And he says, you need to be born again, start over. Go back to the beginning, it's all worthless. He goes to the Samaritan woman. Just having a casual conversation, talking about some, pointy theological issues like worshipping on this mountain. Oh, you want to go and get your husband? Well, gee, don't step on the landmine. You don't poke too hard. Do you know what? Sometimes people need to be shaken. Sometimes people need to be reached. Sometimes people, do you know, the most loving thing you can do with some people who are in this morass of self-worship is to show them that they're not all that, and they might cry, and it'll be the best day of their life. I always say to people, the best day of my life was the day I found out I was a sinner going to hell, because it created something. It created that sense of sorrow, which Jesus talks about in the Beatitudes. Those who mourn, they shall be comforted. It's the gateway, it's the threshold. You know, this age of self, I fear, is immunizing people against the gospel. Because the gospel begins with repentance in terms of our own response. You can't repent when you're worth it. You know, you can't repent when Jesus came because he wanted to affirm your humanity. Well, what did he bother coming for? Obviously, I didn't need the salvation. No, the wonder of Christ's coming is that you were not worth it. The wonder of Christ's coming is that you were in rebellion against God. The wonder of his coming is that we, his creatures, walked away, and he pursued us. He pursued us. And that statement that, you know, he will make us worth it, it comes from him. It doesn't come from us. It's not because of what we did. It's because of who he is and the greatness of his character. But, you know, this has gone so far that we're not only, you know, laws are like this as well. You know, what's harm these days under a lot of statutes in Australia? It's offence. I'm offended. Aha, sue them. And so it comes from, you know, within me. That's the basis for what is right. And also, we have got to the point where we've so puffed ourselves up that we are the creators now. We decide right, we decide wrong. We decide what sexuality we are, we decide what gender we are, we decide, you know, I could go on forever. There's far more subtle manifestations of it in our own lives. You know, the number one poem in British schools, the number one poem title in British schools today among school students is Who Am I? We are, might I say, millennials and Gen Z, we are that generation of self. Who am I? The most important question. And you know the sad thing? The students writing those poems don't know the answer. They are trying to construct an answer from a menu of identity options, which consists of a bunch of self-selected attributes. And neither one is better than the other, and neither one is more right than the other. And they can be anything, do anything, dream big, and however they like. And they can construct an identity, and you know what? They're confused. Who am I? Who am I? Surprise. No moral boundaries. No direction given. No parameters for selection. Do you know what the answer to that question is biblically? Who am I? The answer is no. In other words, wrong question. Wrong question. As humans, we were described from the very beginning as made in the image of God. That is, that we were made to correspond to him, to reflect him, to embody those attributes which can be communicated to us, to be righteous, to be holy. He made us very good, he said, in my image. And the whole story of the fall on the next page is the story of the loss of righteousness, the entrance of sin. We were made to correspond with him, which is the definition of righteousness. That's what we're here for. We are made to image God. So it's the wrong question and the correct question that we need to give our lives to answering, which I say we all need to remember this day and give our lives to answering the question, who is God? Who is God? The rest will fall straight into place off the back of that answer. You know, by obsessing over that one question, who am I? And becoming the who am I generation. Do you know a fact, an actual fact? We are the most depressed and anxious generation in the history of the Western world. I think it's got a lot to do with this. The reason is, if you do cut yourself off from that which is above and you send yourself into that which is inside you, you've got to ask the question, what are you going to find? What are you going to find? And you know, there's a lot of this plays into the fact, are people basically good or are they basically bad? And a lot of people today think that people are basically good. That just defies logic. It defies logic. Why is it that when you have a child, you have to spend the kid's whole life, from the moment it can talk and function, teaching it to do what is right. Not teaching it to do what is wrong. You don't have to do that. My goodness, it'll take to that like a duck to water. It doesn't need to find out. And you get moments, parents always get moments where they think, how did they become so deceitful? How did they become so clever? How could they manipulate me so good? I've got nieces and nephews, wonderful, beautiful kids. But sometimes you go, oh, where did that come from? Where did that come from? The enterprise of our life is not to double down on what comes out of the self. It is actually to say no to the self. The child will want wrong. The child needs to be told no. That's a basic parenting tip. And I was listening to Dennis Prager the other day, who is a Jew, a very, very, very devout Jew. Oh, a very serious Jew, maybe is a better way to put it. But the reason I like to listen to him is because his knowledge of the Old Testament and of biblical law and of wisdom is incredible, and you can get real insights from him, real insights. And he'll say these pithy one-liners where you're like, oh, he heard that from a rabbi somewhere and it's brilliant. And he said, do you know what? He said, a good person is a person who has learned to say no to themselves. That's true. The biblical quality is self-control, discipline, transformation from one degree of glory into another. That's the biblical call. It is that there is a perfect template that is outside of ourselves, who is, by the way, the image of God. Jesus. Do you know that phrase, Imago Dei, image of God? It's almost lost from the Bible after Genesis 9. And when it resurfaces, it's barely used in relation to us. It's overwhelmingly used in relation to Jesus. We are being transformed into the image of Christ, which is created in true righteousness and holiness. I think that's an amalgamation of two verses, but I think it says, the new man which is renewed after the image of its creator in true righteousness and holiness. And we are those who are transformed from one degree of glory into another, into the image of Christ. For the light of the glory of God has shone into our hearts in the face of Jesus Christ. And we hear image of God and we think about ourselves. No. Think about Jesus. Think about he who is the perfect image of God, he who is the righteous one, he who is holy, and he has all that we need in himself for us to transform into the same image. It's not about this. It all comes from outside of myself. Now, I have got so excited I don't even know where I am in my notes. I just want to say this before I do the next session, which is much more based around God's great and grand solution to these problems. But I do want to say how important this is, because we think we get away with these sorts of mindsets and this sort of living. We don't really. In the modern West, we get away with it in certain respects. We have, the most grotesque example would be a sexual health clinic. Technology and money masks the problem, right? But also we live in a day when modern psychology and when, cultural norms and all the rest of it mask the destruction this mindset is having on us, whoever we are. I want to make a point. We don't get away with it. I talked about being mentally sick. I talk about a society that's... And look, I'm not saying that all mental illness is wickedness. Not at all. Do not take that. But what I am saying is that what we are finding is that this is a false foundation for the answers for our life. This is a false foundation for inner peace. This is a false foundation for living as human beings in the image of God. In fact, the foundation is the opposite. And the truth is spoken, and it enters our conscience, and it accuses us in our psychology. That's where it accuses us. Society doesn't accuse us anymore. Do whatever the heck you like. No one's going to care. Hey, if you live by yourself, all the better. No one's looking. But there's the conscience. There's the psychology. There's the inner person. And I want to make the point that we live in a world that is crying out for truth. Because people are suffering. People are dying. Do you know the suicide epidemic in our generation is unthinkable? It's horrendous what's going on. Do you know when those false ideologies have their most grotesque application? like gender reassignment. Do you know the percentage of those people that die? It's horrendous. We need an answer. We are compelled to walk into a generation of self-worship with an answer, and to be not ashamed of that answer, as Paul says. Not to shrink back from it, but to know with confidence God has the solution that we crave, that we need, that is hope for humanity. For it will not come from human beings by nature, because we've just proved that. And the great answer that we give is said in those words of Paul, I am not ashamed of the gospel, the power of God outside of ourselves for salvation, a deliverance, a transformation. Why? Because the righteousness of God is revealed. My goodness, now we know that's the thing we need. And it's revealed to us by faith. And next session, I want to delve into exactly what all of those words mean and how they apply to our present culture. Thanks.